Hello, this is the A Switch, and this is actually the second time I've recorded this video because when I get done doing the first one, I realized it was more of a book review than a video on the autumn equinox, so I decided to redo it. The two books I'll be using are both from Llewellyn's collections. This is the newer collection one. It's a little bit harder to see. And this is the older from the older collection of the Sabbats. This one is particularly written by Ellen Dugan. I do like this one a bit better. It tends to go in a little bit more detail than this one, but this one is really nice if you want a more compact book. And it still gives you really good information. Autumn equinox is obviously the equinox we celebrate in autumn. And for those of you who may not know, the equinox is when the amount of day is equal to the amount of night. So the autumn equinox is during September. It's usually September 21st, but it can be anywhere between the 20th to 22nd. And it is one of the harvest celebrations in traditional paganism, or not traditional paganism, in some of the pagan traditions. Not every pagan tradition or earth-based tradition celebrates all the different Sabbats, which the Sabbats are the nature celebrations around the year. And typically when you see the Wheel of the Year, which is the little, the different holidays or Sabbats that a lot of pagans in Europe and in North America celebrate. If you are Australian, because the seasons are flip-flopped, you would just flip-flop when you celebrate which holiday. So like when we celebrate Yule, they would be celebrating Australia. I would be celebrating Midsummer. So, nifty little fact, if for those of you who may not know, September is the beginning of the fall season, and it's when you start seeing pumpkin spice and apple and a lot of your fall holidays. I love hay rides. I have not been on one since a child. I am still looking for a hay ride to go on too. It's just something that I really want to experience again, that I really enjoyed as a kid. And a lot of places have some form of Oktoberfest. You have a lot of orchards that open up. You have some like pumpkin patches and different things like that. They're all fun and exciting, but I'm going to focus more on the magical celebrations. And these are based off of the European pagan traditions, like a lot of your Celtic focused type celebrations. Your Nordic path traditions are going to have, they celebrate like a Yule time, but they have other celebrations as well. Things like your Hellenistic pagans may not celebrate these traditions. They may celebrate their own that is based off of more of the Greek celebrations. So while you have these are not a end-all be-all celebration. It is the stuff you're going to find the most information on. And it does follow more of the seasons in like Europe and North America. If you happen to live somewhere else, like I was thinking Egypt, or like somewhere in Africa, or even like Hawaii, where the seasons are very different from what we have where I live, you may want to celebrate things differently. Those places may or may not have their own seasonal celebrations, and you may want to come up with your own based off of what information you can find. But if you live in North America, Europe, and I know there is a collection of Australian pagans as well who follow this Wheel of the Year, this will be informative for you, or if you're just interested. So I'm gonna pick a couple things out of these books to look at and read from, and because in my first video I kind of just showed you what was in these books, and I didn't feel like that was super helpful. This book here talks about how in the autumn equinox, also called Mabon, marks another important seasonal change and a second harvest. because you have 3 harvest celebrations. You have Lammas Uranasa, which is a bread holiday, grain harvest. A lot of people make bread. They celebrate like the beginning of the harvest season. If you are a bread person, you would love this holiday. The sun shines equally on both hemispheres, and the length of night and day are equal. After this point, the nights will again be longer than the day. In connection with the harvest, the day is celebrated as a festival of sacrifice and of the dying god, and tribute is paid to the sun and the fertile earth. So, in reference to the dying god, in some of the neo-pagan traditions, you have the Holly King and the Oat King myth, which kind of explains the light and dark half of the year and how it follows the sun's, how the days are lengthened and shortened, and it just follows the power of the sun. It's just a mythos that helps celebrate those cycles. To the Celtic people, Samhain is marked as the start of winter season. It is the time when the livestock was slaughtered and the final harvest was gathered before the inevitable plunge into the depths of the winter darkness. Fires were lit to help wandering spirits on their way, and offerings were given in the names of the gods and ancestors. Okay, so those are your 3 harvest holidays. You have your grains, you have the majority of the harvest, which is around the equinox time, and then you have the blood harvest, which is what Halloween time, this Samhain, is traditionally associated with. Because back in the day, back before we had supermarkets, and back before there was a lot of places that had local butchers, a lot of people raised animals for food, and you had to make the choice of whether or not you're going to slaughter and how many you're going to, because you only had so much grain to feed those animals, or food for those animals throughout the winter, and you also had to feed yourself throughout the winter. So a lot of that, maybe not a lot, but some of that gory aspect of Halloween time comes from that necessity that a lot of us are not super connected with nowadays. Let's not rabbit hole. We need to focus on autumn equinox. It says that the harvest festivals celebrated more than just finished work for the season. They celebrated the capacity to survive in the winter. The best known of these harvest festivals is the Eclusian Mysteries, a week-long celebration in ancient Greece that fell close to the autumn equinox. Mabon is a modern addition to the celebrations of harvest, sacrifice, and survival. While Wiccans often think of Mabon as a pagan Thanksgiving, those who reconsider the dying god myths inherent to the holiday may also acknowledge it as a sort of pagan Easter. Mabon gives thanks not only just for our food, but also for the sacrifices necessary for us to survive. Which is kind of a theme that one of the books in my more mundane celebration of this month and this season kind of addresses. In Romancing the Ordinary, it kind of talks about this is the season of what you need to let go of. So it is very neat to see that overlapping. Sabbath celebrations mark seasonal points most familiar to the British worldview. So that's one thing to remember, like I mentioned earlier, that this is a very specific type of worldview on the seasons. But it is not applicable to everybody. It is the season of Libra and the season of Virgo, and then Libra. It is also a time that a lot of people like to start think more about their ancestors. And I think it's because of the time of thinking of loss and preparing for winter. And there is a lot of association on Samhain with ancestors. But that doesn't mean that's the only time of year that you can celebrate them and think of them. And not everybody has a warm and fuzzy feeling with their ancestors. It's not something you have to do, but a lot of nature-based and pagan traditions do some form of ancestor, if not worship, but ancestor honoring. Whatever works for you. I'm not going to go real in depth with the dying god mythos unless any of you suggest any interest in any specific mythos or information that I mention. If you guys are more interested, let me know and I can always do a video on it. You may not get much for this year's September month stuff because I'll cut it real close because I've been meaning to start these videos and start this channel before this. That's all I'm gonna say about it. I procrastinated. Let's look at the other one, because while that is still all good information, a lot of that's kind of getting a little nitty-gritty and that may not be the most entertaining. Ellen Dugan gets into several of the mythologies. She mentions the goddess of the grain, the harvest, and the earth. A lot of goddess-focused imagery and ideas that are associated with the autumn equinox. Goddesses like Gaia, which is the earth. Some of other goddesses include Astarte and Ishtar, Isis, Demeter. She also mentions, for some of the indigenous people in the Americas, the old woman who never dies and the mother of maize, which I'm not super familiar with, but is also good to know for those of us who live in the US and might want to read some of the stories of the peoples who were here on this land before we're here now, as a way to honor those peoples whose lands were stolen. She goes on in a section like, you call it corn, we call it maize, which is very America specific. It's corn. Corn before, I'm gonna get a little historical on you guys. Before the Europeans came over to the US, or the Americas, corn was just a general term for grains. What was originally called maize is what a lot of people consider corn nowadays. It's just something I've always found kind of fascinating, how things change and how things get affected like that. John Barleycorn and the Lord of the Harvest. You know what? Let's read a little bit about John Barleycorn. Ellen Dugan wrote that the harvest celebrations all embrace the idea of sacrifice. However, it is a symbolic sacrifice only. The sacrifice is the one that is made by the spirit of the grain, sometimes known as John Barleycorn. There is a very popular old ballad for John Barleycorn. It's been remixed into songs, and you may find many versions of the poem all over the internet. It is often listed as author unknown. However, it is actually written by Robert Burns and published in 1782. It's sort of a gruesome ballad, but yeah, it's about, John Barleycorn was about a guy that was being sacrificed, but it's a symbolism of sacrificing grain. He symbolized grain being sacrificed. I'm not going to read the entire ballad, but it continues on with that. The theme in a lot of the Wiccan mythos for this time of year, where the god sacrifices himself, but he will be reborn, and so it's kind of a symbolism of the vegetation. So in a lot of these traditions, the god is tied heavily into the animals and vegetation of the land. And so this time of year, a lot of the vegetation is harvested or dies down. So it's a mythos to celebrate that. With the full moons in September, it's anything that is kind of harvest, balance related. A lot of your pagan traditions like to celebrate the full moons or Ebbats, as well as your Sabbats. And I'm not going to go into detail on that. That can be a series we do at a later date. Your full moons are traditionally associated with release and letting go, because they're moving into they have come to completion, and it's very similar to this time of year. Once it starts waning or getting smaller, you want to follow that energy as what do you want to grow smaller and disappear in your life. So it's very similar to like the autumn energies of what you want to let go, as opposed to the new moon, where that letting go cycle is now complete and now the moon is getting bigger, and what do you want to grow in your life. Kind of very simplified version of the moon cycles right there. We got harvest goddesses. We got Demeter. She's the ultimate harvest mother goddess according to Ellen Dugan. tied to the Persephone, tale of Persephone and Hades, which is, I've a lot of times, not a lot of times, I've seen several rituals this time of year dealing with the Persephone and Demeter and Hades mythos. She has Ellen of the Ways. I'm not super familiar with her, but she is a Celtic goddess. Pomona, Roman goddess of apples, which makes sense this time of year, especially in Europe and the US. And then going on to the gods, she mentions Dionysus, god of the vine. If you've ever seen Fantasia, the drunken god who's drinking, that is their depiction of Dionysus. I've never seen him that chunky in any of the pagan takes of him. He's very much like grape harvest, wine, celebration. You have the green man, which is he's kind of like the embodiment of nature in the masculine vibe. He's all the foliage and all that jazz. You see like you sometimes see those little garden decorations where it's like the leaf face, usually a dude. That's a depiction of him. You've got Herne the Hunter, magical projects and stuff. I'm not going to do a project video for September because I've cut myself too short on that. But I would like to do some sort of a craft or project video for at least each Sabbath. But these have great ideas for that. There's a grape wreath in here, a metallic leaf wreath, leafy luminaries, which, oh yeah, he has like a jar, can use a canning jar. You can get a jar from Dollar Tree, put some sand, pebbles, what have you in it. They have you put actual candles in this with leaves and berries and stuff, which you can do if you're going to watch it. I would probably do some either LED candles or the little strings of lights, especially if you have like kids or pets. That's what I would do for that personally on a safety side of things. It does have some herbal soaps. I do have some soap making stuff. Usually what I do for an autumn equinox is I'll probably find some kind of guided meditation online. I'll make something to eat and, like I said, do a meditation and probably a card reading. And that's usually about what I do for the Sabbaths. I would love to do all the things and like go to the festivals, do some fancy baking and do a ritual and all that and like everything. But to be honest, most Sabbaths, no matter what kind of good intentions I have, I don't typically have the energy to do all the things I want to do. So it's usually something simple, like make something special to eat that is themed around the Sabbath, do a card reading and a meditation. It is also, like I mentioned to some degree on my other video, good to realize that not everyone is going to have the same capabilities or the same energy levels to do everything that a lot of these books suggest. Some people don't have the interest, and some people go, you know what, I would love to, bake special cookies or make this roast or something, but, I burn water. Hey, this is Editing A Switch, and I realized the end of my video got cut off, and I wanted to end it by saying that not everyone connects with every Sabbath, and you can decide to adjust to however you feel necessary to celebrate, or you can just skip it altogether. I have one Sabbath that I do not really connect with, and that's Imbolc, and I have a hard time celebrating that one, so it's your spiritual journey, and it is however you want to celebrate. And I want to thank all of you for putting up with my very first video. I was not the most prepared, and my editing's probably not the greatest, but I look forward to this learning journey with you guys, and I wish all of you a happy equinox.